My name is Antonio Tony Marcelli. I'm 42 years old, and I have the kind of deep brown eyes that my late wife used to say could see into people's souls, thick black hair that's just starting to show gray at the temples, and the weathered hands of a man who spent 20 years building something from nothing. My face tells the story of long nights in hot kitchens, sharp cheekbones, a strong Italian nose inherited from my grandfather, and laugh lines around my eyes that come from genuinely loving what I do for a living, 20 years. That's how long I spent turning Marcelli's from a struggling family restaurant into the crown jewel of Boston's North End. While other chefs chased Michelin stars and TV appearances, I built something more valuable: loyalty. The kind of customer loyalty that creates lines around the block and reservations booked 6 months in advance. Vincent Chin sat across from me in that sterile corporate conference room, his satisfied smirk telling me everything I needed to know about how this meeting was going to end. He was 31, hired 8 months ago as the new Director of Operations after Sterling Restaurant Group bought us out. New ownership meant new ideas, and apparently, tradition and proven success were old ideas. "Tony," he said, sliding a manila folder across the polished table, "we've decided to take the restaurant in a different direction. Your services are no longer needed." I looked at him calmly, then at the 2 other suits flanking him, corporate lawyers who probably couldn't tell the difference between basil and oregano. "I built this place, Vincent. Every recipe, every supplier relationship, And we appreciate that," he interrupted, checking his Apple Watch. "But Sterling Restaurant Group has a proven formula for maximizing profitability. We're bringing in Marcus Webb from our Seattle location. He specializes in modernizing traditional establishments." Marcus Webb, I knew that name. He was the guy who had taken Rossetti's 100-year-old Italian institution in Seattle and turned it into another generic Italian fusion chain restaurant. Same plastic atmosphere, same frozen ingredients, same soulless corporate formula replicated in 43 locations across the country. "The severance package is quite generous," Vincent continued, tapping the folder. "Clean out your office by Friday." I nodded slowly, stood up, and shook his hand. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said. 20 years was a good run. Vincent's smirk widened. He thought I was taking it well, broken, defeated, ready to shuffle out quietly like the other family restaurant owners Sterling had pushed aside across the region. What Vincent didn't know was that 3 months ago, when I first heard rumors about Sterling's acquisition plans, I had quietly started documenting everything. Every recipe I had created, every supplier contact I had cultivated, every trade secret that made Marcelli's special. Not under Sterling Restaurant Group's ownership, under Tony Marcelli Culinary Consulting, LLC, a company I had registered the day after the buyout was announced. It was perfectly legal. The recipes were my creations. The relationships were built on trust, my trust, and the knowledge of how to source the best ingredients, how to manage a kitchen that produced consistent excellence, how to create an atmosphere that made customers feel like family. That lived in my head, not in Sterling's corporate database. I walked back to my office, the same office where I had planned menus, negotiated with suppliers, and built the systems that made Marcelli's legendary. 20 years of industry awards went into a cardboard box. The photo of my late wife Maria, taken in our kitchen on our 10th anniversary, went carefully into my briefcase. The contact list of every supplier, every distributor, every specialty food importer I had worked with over 2 decades, that stayed exactly where it was. Let them figure out why those phone numbers didn't work for them. My phone buzzed. A text from Giuseppe Romano at Romano's Fine Foods, our primary supplier of authentic Italian ingredients. "Heard about Sterling taking over. You okay?" I typed back, "All good, might have some interesting news soon." Vincent walked past my office, probably making sure I wasn't stealing anything valuable. He had no idea what he had just set in motion. I started at Marcelli's right after Maria died. Cancer took her in 6 brutal months, and I needed something to focus on besides the empty house and the medical bills that had drained our savings. The restaurant had been my grandfather's dream, but 3 generations of family mismanagement had nearly killed it. The first few years were about survival, learning the business side, not just the cooking. understanding food costs, labor management, health department regulations. But more importantly, learning that great restaurants aren't built on recipes alone, they're built on relationships. My first breakthrough came during the fish shortage of 2019. Our usual seafood supplier was having problems with their Boston wholesaler, and we were facing a weekend without the fresh catches that made our Friday night specials legendary. I spent 2 days calling every contact I could find, finally connecting with a fishing boat captain who sold directly to restaurants. That's when I realized something crucial. Suppliers don't do business with restaurant names. They do business with people they trust, people who pay on time, treat them with respect, and understand that their success depends on mutual loyalty. Over the years, I cultivated those relationships deliberately. I learned Giuseppe's kids' names, remembered when Tony Salvatore's father was in the hospital, flew to food shows not to discover new products but to have dinner with the people who made my restaurant possible. When COVID hit and supply chains collapsed, those relationships saved us. While other restaurants fought over inferior ingredients from big distributors, I had suppliers setting aside their best products for Marcelli's. Not because of contract terms, but because they knew I would take care of them when things got better. Vincent Chin arrived 8 months ago with an MBA from Wharton and ideas about operational efficiency. He looked at my supplier relationships and saw waste, too much personal contact, too many phone calls, too much trust, not enough competitive bidding. We need to standardize, he told me during our first meeting. Sterling Restaurant Group has preferred vendors, bulk purchasing agreements, centralized menu planning. We can cut food costs by 25%. I nodded and kept cooking, but I started noticing changes. My purchase orders needed approval from corporate. Supplier meetings were scheduled without including me. New menu items were being tested by people who had never cooked in my kitchen. Last month, I overheard Vincent on a call with the regional director. Tony's methods are outdated. He's too emotionally attached to these suppliers. We can achieve the same quality with standardized ingredients at half the price. That's when I knew my time was limited. Not because I was failing, but because I was succeeding in ways that corporate spreadsheets couldn't measure. I made some quiet phone calls, updated some paperwork, made sure certain relationships were properly documented under the right legal entity. Vincent thought he was eliminating inefficiency. He had no idea he was about to learn the difference between managing a restaurant and understanding food. Friday afternoon, I loaded the last box into my truck and walked out of Marcelli's for the final time. The prep cook, Diego, shook my hand at the back door. "Heard about the changes, chef," he said quietly. "Sorry to see you go." "Thanks, Diego. Take care of yourself." I drove home to my house in the North End and sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. 20 years of work reduced to 3 cardboard boxes in my hallway. Maria's photo smiled at me from the counter. She would have found this whole situation darkly amusing. 35 years of marriage and you still don't see trouble coming until it hits you, she used to say, but this time I had seen it coming. And I had prepared? My phone rang. Giuseppe Romano from Romano's Fine Foods. "Tony, heard through the grapevine that you might be making some changes. Wanted to touch base." "Actually, Giuseppe, I'm thinking about going independent. Consulting, maybe starting something new. Question for you. If I open my own place, would Romano's be interested in exclusive partnership agreements? Better terms than what you have with the big chains?" Giuseppe was quiet for a moment. "Tony, you know damn well that 90% of our specialty business comes through relationships you built. If you're asking whether we'd rather work with you directly or deal with whatever corporate suit they put in your place, that's not even a question." I made 8 more calls that evening, same conversation, same response. By Saturday morning, I had commitments from every major supplier I had worked with for the past decade. Not just to do business with my new restaurant, to terminate their existing contracts with Sterling Restaurant Group. The beautiful thing about supplier relationships in the restaurant industry is that most contracts have 30-day termination clauses, standard protection for both sides. Suppliers can't be locked into deals with unreliable restaurants, and restaurants can't be stuck with vendors who don't deliver quality. What Vincent didn't understand was that those suppliers had been doing business with me, not with Sterling Restaurant Group. When I left, the relationships left with me. I spent the weekend setting up Marcelli's authentic Italian, different name, same soul. Business license, insurance, bank accounts. I even found a perfect location, a beautiful space in the North End that had been a family bakery for 60 years. By Sunday evening, I had a functioning restaurant concept, financial backing from 3 different investors who had been customers at the old Marcelli's, and a staff ready to follow me, Diego, and 2 other cooks, plus my longtime sous chef, Maria Santos, who had been with me for 8 years. Monday morning, I sent out termination notices. 7 major suppliers, 30-day notice, professional, courteous, and completely legal. Then I sat back and waited. Vincent was about to discover that firing the guy who built your entire supply chain was like firing the foundation of your building. Everything else just collapses. Tuesday morning, Vincent Chun walked into his corporate office expecting a routine day of implementing operational efficiencies. Instead, he found his assistant holding a stack of overnight faxes and looking panicked. "These came in this morning," she said. "Contract terminations." Vincent glanced at the first page. Romano's Fine Foods, 30-day termination notice, effective immediately for new orders. The second page was worse. Salvatore Brothers Seafood, same notice. By the third page, Vincent's hands were shaking. 7 of their most critical suppliers, all terminating on the same day. He grabbed his phone and called Romano's Fine Foods. "Giuseppe Romano, please. This is Vincent Chun from Sterling Restaurant Group." "Giuseppe's in a meeting," the receptionist said. "Can I take a message?" "This is about the termination notice. There must be some mistake." "No mistake. Mr. Romano was very clear about the decision." "I need to speak with him today. This is urgent." "I'll pass along the message." The line went dead. Vincent tried Salvatore Brothers Seafood. Tony Salvatore wasn't available. Neither was the account manager or anyone else who could explain why they were suddenly canceling contracts with one of their biggest restaurant clients. By noon, he had called every terminated supplier. None of them would take his calls. He pulled up the vendor files on his computer, looking for leverage, contract terms, penalty clauses, anything that could force them to honor their agreements. What he found made his stomach drop. Every major contract had been personally negotiated during 2020 and 2021. During the pandemic supply shortages, all of them included 30-day termination clauses with no penalties, standard industry practice for restaurants. But there was something else. The contact person listed on every contract wasn't Sterling Restaurant Group. It was Tony Marcelli, executive chef. Vincent stared at his screen. He had fired the guy whose name was on every critical supplier relationship, the guy who had apparently structured those relationships to be portable. His phone rang, Regional Director James Mitchell. "Vincent, I'm getting calls from 3 Sterling locations. They're saying their food deliveries have been canceled." "What the hell is going on?" "We had some vendor contract issues. I'm handling it." "Handling it how?" "The Boston location says their seafood order for tonight was just canceled. They have 200 reservations." Vincent felt sweat on his forehead. "I'll call them back and straighten this out. You better. If we lose revenue because of supply chain failures, someone's getting fired. And it won't be me." After Mitchell hung up, Vincent sat in his office trying to process what was happening. Tony Marcelli had been fired on Monday. By Tuesday, their entire supply network was falling apart. He called Human Resources. "I need Tony Marcelli's personal contact information. We have some follow-up questions about his vendor relationships. I can't give out personal information on former employees, company policy. This is business critical. We're having supply chain issues. You'll need to go through legal for that kind of request." Legal told him that it would take at least a week to process the request, maybe longer. By Wednesday morning, the situation was critical. 4 Sterling locations were scrambling to find ingredients for their dinner service. The regional manager was demanding answers. Vincent finally swallowed his pride and tried calling information for Tony Marcelli's home number. "The number you have requested is unlisted." He slammed the phone down and stared at the termination notices spread across his desk. 7 suppliers, hundreds of thousands of dollars in monthly orders, all gone because he had fired one man, the man who had apparently built the entire system he was supposed to be managing. Wednesday afternoon, Vincent decided to visit some of the suppliers in person. If they wouldn't take his calls, maybe face-to-face meetings would work. His first stop was Romano's Fine Foods, a warehouse facility in Medford. He walked into the office wearing his best suit and carrying a briefcase full of contract amendments he had prepared overnight. "I'm here to see Giuseppe Romano," he told the receptionist. "Vincent Chun from Sterling Restaurant Group?" The receptionist made a phone call, spoke quietly for a moment, then hung up. "Mr. Romano isn't available. I drove here specifically to resolve our contract situation. This is important." "I understand, but he's not available." Vincent waited in the lobby for an hour, watching employees move pallets of imported Italian ingredients that used to be destined for his restaurants. Finally, a man in his 60s walked out, stocky build, work clothes, the unmistakable bearing of someone who had built his business from the ground up. "You Vincent Chun?" "Yes, are you Giuseppe Romano?" "I am, walk with me." He led Vincent outside to the loading dock, where workers were loading trucks with wheels of authentic Parmigiano Reggiano and cases of San Marzano tomatoes. "Let me save us both some time," Giuseppe said. "We're not resuming business with Sterling Restaurant Group. That decision is final. Can you tell me why? We've had a good relationship." Giuseppe stopped walking and looked at him directly. "Son, we never had a relationship with Sterling Restaurant Group. We had a relationship with Tony Marcelli. When you fired Tony, you fired our business partnership." "But the contracts were written to protect both sides. Tony made sure of that during COVID when everyone was scrambling. He told us that if anything ever happened to him, we wouldn't be stuck dealing with people who didn't understand the difference between authentic Italian ingredients and mass-produced garbage." Vincent felt a chill. "What do you mean, if anything happened to him? Tony's been in this business for 20 years. He's seen family restaurants get bought and destroyed by corporate chains who think profit margins are more important than quality. He protected us from that. We can offer better terms, more volume, competitive pricing." Giuseppe shook his head. "You don't get it. This isn't about money, it's about trust. Tony spent 20 years proving he was reliable. When restaurants needed ingredients during COVID, he paid his bills even when he wasn't making money. When my grandson needed heart surgery last year, Tony organized a fundraiser in his restaurant." Vincent listened, beginning to understand the scope of what he had lost. "You fired the guy who built our entire business relationship," Giuseppe continued. "Now you want us to trust you instead? Son, we don't even know you. Where is Tony now?" Giuseppe smiled for the first time during their conversation. "Opening his own place, Marcelli's Authentic Italian. And guess who his first supplier is going to be?" Vincent drove back to the office in stunned silence. He had thought Tony was just another employee, a chef who cooked food and managed kitchen staff. What he had actually fired was the human foundation of their entire supply chain. By Thursday morning, he had a clearer picture of the disaster. Every supplier who had terminated their contracts was now working exclusively with Tony's new restaurant. Every Sterling location that depended on those ingredients was scrambling to find alternatives at twice the price and half the quality. The regional director called an emergency meeting for Friday. Vincent spent Thursday night updating his resume. Friday morning, Vincent sat in the conference room with regional director James Mitchell and 3 other Sterling executives. The mood was grim. "Explain to me how we lost 7 major suppliers in 1 week. Mitchell said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Vincent had prepared for this moment. He opened his folder and laid out the supplier termination notices. "It appears that our former chef Tony Marcelli structured these contracts in a way that made them portable. When we terminated his employment, the suppliers chose to follow him to his new restaurant." "His new restaurant?" "Marcelli's Authentic Italian. He registered the business the day after we fired him." Mitchell studied the termination notices. "These are all perfectly legal. 30-day notice periods, no penalty clauses. Standard industry practice?" "Yes." "And you fired the guy who negotiated all of these contracts?" Vincent felt the room getting smaller. We were modernizing the operation. His position was eliminated as part of efficiency measures? Efficiency measures? Mitchell set down the papers and looked directly at him. Vincent, do you understand what you've done? Before he could answer, his assistant knocked on the conference room door. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Mitchell. You have an urgent call from the Boston location. Mitchell took the call in the conference room. Vincent and the other executives listened to one side of the conversation. I understand. Yes, we're aware of the supply issues. No, we don't have alternative suppliers lined up yet. How long can you wait? When he hung up, Mitchell's expression was dangerous. The Boston location is our flagship restaurant. 40% of our regional revenue. They have a private event for 200 people tomorrow night, and they can't get the ingredients they need because their suppliers are all working with Tony Marcelli now. The silence in the room was heavy. There's more, Vincent's assistant said from the doorway. Tony Marcelli called. He's offering to meet with us. Mitchell looked up sharply. He wants to meet? This afternoon, if possible. He said he has a proposal that might help resolve the supply chain disruptions. Vincent felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief that maybe they could salvage the situation. Dread that Tony was now in a position to dictate terms. Set up the meeting, Mitchell said. 2 o'clock. After the executives left, Vincent sat alone in the conference room. His efficiency measures had turned into a company-threatening crisis in less than a week. The man he had fired with such confidence was now the only person who could save their business. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Vincent, this is Tony. Looking forward to our meeting this afternoon. Come prepared to discuss partnership terms. The suppliers are willing to resume service to Sterling's restaurants, but only through my company as the primary distributor. We'll need to work out the details. Vincent stared at the message. Tony wasn't offering to come back as an employee. He was offering to become their supplier. The man he had eliminated to increase efficiency was about to become their most expensive vendor. At exactly 2 p.m., Tony Marcelli walked into the Sterling Restaurant Group conference room wearing a charcoal gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He looked calm, professional, and completely in control. The same conference room where Vincent had fired him exactly 1 week earlier. Tony, Mitchell said, thank you for coming. We understand you might be able to help us resolve these supplier relationship issues. Tony opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. I can do more than help. I can solve the problem completely. My suppliers are willing to resume service to all Sterling locations immediately. Vincent felt a surge of hope. However, Tony continued, they'll only do business through Marcelli Culinary Services. I'll serve as the primary distributor. You'll purchase all specialty ingredients through my company. Mitchell leaned forward. What kind of terms are we talking about? Tony slid a contract across the table. Standard distributor markup is 15%. Given the urgency of the situation and the specialized relationships involved, my markup will be 30%. Vincent's heart sank. 30% markup on hundreds of thousands of dollars in monthly orders meant Tony would be making more as their vendor than he ever had as their chef. That seems excessive, he said. Tony looked at him with the same calm smile he had given him when he was fired. Vincent, a week ago I was a cost to be eliminated. Today I'm the only solution to your supply chain crisis. The market determines value. Mitchell studied the contract. These terms are actually reasonable for exclusive distributor relationships. How quickly can you restore service? Supplier relationships will be reactivated within 24 hours. Restaurant deliveries resume Monday morning, all existing quality standards maintained. And the legal structure protects both companies completely. Mitchell signed the contract without further discussion. Tony shook hands with everyone in the room. When he reached Vincent, he held his gaze for a moment. Thanks for the opportunity, he said. Sometimes the best business decisions look like mistakes at first. 6 months later, Marcelli Culinary Services had grown from a spare room operation to a regional food distribution powerhouse. The supplier relationships Tony had cultivated over 20 years became the foundation for contracts with restaurant chains across New England. Vincent Chun lasted another month at Sterling Restaurant Group, before accepting a position with a software company in Silicon Valley. The supply chain crisis had been resolved, but his reputation as a manager was irreparably damaged. Tony kept the business personal. No corporate headquarters, no layers of management, just reliable people delivering exceptional ingredients to places where they mattered most. He hired 5 employees, all of them from his old contacts in the industry. People who understood that food service wasn't about optimizing spreadsheets, but about making sure a chef never had to compromise on quality because the right ingredients weren't available. On a Thursday evening in December, Tony sat in his home office reviewing the week's delivery reports. Every restaurant order fulfilled on time, every supplier payment processed promptly. No emergencies, no crises, no angry calls from chefs whose menus were compromised by inferior ingredients. His phone rang. Giuseppe Romano. Tony, got a minute? We're thinking about expanding into the Connecticut market. Interested in growing the partnership? Always interested in good business, Giuseppe. Send me the proposal. After he hung up, Tony looked at Maria's photo on his desk. She would have been proud. Not because he had gotten revenge on the people who fired him, but because he had built something better from what they threw away. Sometimes the best response to being undervalued is proving your worth on your own terms.